Thank you, Commissioner. Prime Minister, good afternoon. Prime Minister, I'd like to ask you some questions about a different topic, and it's about foreign interference in political party nomination processes. So it picks up a bit on some of the points that Ms. Chaudhry made and also the Commissioner raised with you when we came back. And so I'd like, if we could, to take the Prime Minister to Witness Statement 106, to PDF page 10, and particularly to paragraph 36. Mr. Prime Minister, this is one of your statements. So, great, thank you. So, Prime Minister, your evidence here is that you noted that political parties are not unique in their vulnerability to foreign interference from hostile actors. Universities, research institutions, and businesses are also targets. And so I want to dig into that a bit and ask you a question about that statement. And so in your testimony this morning briefly, and also I think a bit more in your witness statements, you talked about Bill C-70, didn't you?
Yes.
And I think it's fair to say that you'd regard Bill 70 as, let's say, a signature piece of legislation from your government on foreign interference.
Anytime we, as a government or as a parliament, pass measures around national security, they tend to be significant.
So with leave of the Commissioner, I've advised our friends from the Department of Justice regarding this. I hope they don't object. I'd like to take you to the version of Bill 70 we have in the database, because there's a provision about it that I'd like to ask you about if I could.
It's fine if there's no objection.
No objection.
Yeah, thank you. And so it's Commission 382, and in particular, it's a long bill, as you know. And so it's page 37 that I'd like to go to, and it's the part of it that there's a heading on that page which is political interference for a foreign entity. So if we could go to section 20.4. Yes, and so Prime Minister, I imagine it's been a while since you've read this, so I'd like you to refresh your memory. So there is 20.4 sub 1 creates a new offense, which is titled influencing political or governmental processes or process. And that's the phrase I want to ask you a couple of questions about. It's the phrase a political or governmental process, and it actually appears in that provision 4 lines down. Do you see it?
Yes.
And I know you're not a lawyer, but you are a member of Parliament, and this is a bill of your government. So,
yes.
so I'm going to ask you the best I can about this provision. And so if we could scroll down to the next page. The term, there's some definitions here, and if we could scroll on a bit more, please. It's great. That's terrific. Thank you. And so there's a definition of what a political or governmental process is, and so it's a 6-part definition. But what I want to draw your attention to, Prime Minister, is that it includes in that definition not just the holding of an election, so electoral interference, let's say, would be captured by this, but also the nomination of a candidate or the development of an electoral platform by a political party. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'd now like to take you away from this document and take you to the NSICOP report, which I know the Commissioner also asked you about. And this is Commission Document 363. And if we could please go to page 38 of the PDF. And paragraphs 69 to 70. So that's perfect, thank you. And so Prime Minister, just to confirm, you have read the NSICOP report, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, including the classified version?
Yes.
Okay, and so these paragraphs, 69 and 70, appear in a section called Exploiting Vulnerabilities in Political Party Governance and Administration. And so I just want to confirm, have you read this part of the report?
Yes.
Good. And so I want to ask you a couple of questions about it, if I may. So is there any reason to disagree with NSICOP's conclusion at the beginning of paragraph 69, and I'll quote, which is that foreign actors covertly supported or opposed candidates by exploiting vulnerabilities in political party governance and administration.
Yes.
You disagree with that?
Yeah.
Could you give me a bit more detail?
This is a very general and broad statement that that from the CSIS analysis that I've seen, there have been instances where yes, we know that there were attempts at foreign interference in various political party processes and nominations, and that's something that we talked about in the last public hearings as well. But I tend to disagree with the word exploiting vulnerabilities in political party governance administration. Not that there aren't vulnerabilities in everything, but that emphasis makes it seem like some of the choices that political parties have made are only vulnerabilities and not strengths within the political process.
Well, so, Prime Minister, there's a couple of follow-up questions I want to ask you about your answer, if I may. So the first is, I saw your evidence in the witness statements. It wasn't discussed this morning, but I think it's fair to say that the view you expressed is that any regulation of internal political party governance has to accept that there's a trade-off between hardening those institutions and processes, to use a security sector term,
Yes.
and dampening participation and inclusion.
Yes.
That's fair,
Yes,
correct?
very much.
Right. And so, but the framing of that trade-off in your evidence does concede that that hardening might need to be done because those institutions do have vulnerabilities. Isn't that fair?
Yes, which is why I lean heavily towards the hardening being done by the political party itself in an open, responsible, and transparent way, rather than have external bodies come and try and constrict or limit the operations of a political party.
Good, and we'll get to that just in a minute. But before we do, there's another follow-up point I want to make, and then I want to ask you some questions here about these paragraphs. So you did point out that NSICOP relied on CSIS intelligence products in reaching this conclusion. I just want to...
And in some cases extrapolated a bit from CSIS products.
Fair, and Prime Minister, as you know, I can't ask you a question about that. But
CSIS testified to the fact that there were inconsistencies and inaccuracies in the NSICOP report.
with respect to specific allegations involving parliamentarians, but not specifically about these paragraphs.
Because they weren't asked to weigh in on these.
Sure, and so we don't know what their view is on these paragraphs.
You don't.
Yeah, I don't. And I take it, well, unless you're telling us they do, I don't think we have
I'm not able
evidence
to
from
talk to
CSIS.
that,
So let's
no.
leave it at that, shall we? And so Prime Minister, just for the record, there are footnoted CSIS reports or intelligence products from 3 different years that are relied on by the NSICOP in this section. You agree with that?
That sounds reasonable.
Okay, and so what I want to do is to ask you some specific questions. So about what NSICOP represents as vulnerabilities, and to ask you whether you agree or disagree. So the first vulnerability NSICOP identifies is in paragraph 69. It's 5 lines down, and it says, first, many ridings are considered safe seats, so winning the nomination is akin to winning the subsequent election without having to interfere in the election itself. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
Well, that there are fewer of them in the case of my own party, but there are safe seats in the country.
And the statement that NSICOP makes is
That was a joke. You guys can laugh.
because there are safe seats, interfering in the nomination makes interfering in the election for that seat unnecessary. Is that a fair? That's what NSICOP's view is. Do you agree with that statement? Yes or no?
I wouldn't characterize how foreign governments would choose to interfere or not, or whether it's worth interfering in one place or not. There are many different goals that they might have, so I'm not entirely sure of what you mean by the question.
Okay, well, I'm just asking if you agree with NSICOP's statement there, yes or no. It's a simple question.
I agree with the first part of it. Many ridings are considered safe seats, so winning the nomination is akin to winning the subsequent election. If you put a period on that one, I absolutely agree with that statement. The without having to interfere in the election itself isn't, putting my English teacher hat back on, isn't necessarily, makes a whole bunch of sense as a sentence. Out of the context of the rest of the paragraph.
Well, Prime Minister, I'm not NSICOP, just as you're not CSIS, but I think we can say that for the record, I think NSICOP was saying that if the nomination is really what's at issue in a seat, if a state interferes with that nomination process, it need interfere in the election itself.
If it interferes successfully in getting the outcome that they are trying to achieve, then yes, if it's a safe seat, whoever ends up getting the nomination has a better chance than expected to win the seat. Yes.
Fair. So let's go to the second vulnerability of the three that NSICOP identifies. Second, nomination processes are not directly regulated or safeguarded by federal, provincial, or territorial legislation enforcement bodies, such as the Commissioner of Canada Elections. And so that's the second statement they make. As a result, the likelihood and consequences of the detection of such activities are low. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I disagree with that statement.
And why do you disagree with that statement?
Because political parties, well, I can specifically speak for my own, the Liberal Party has established a very robust system of overseeing nominations, particularly contested nominations that often happen, as you point out, in safer seats where it is expected that whoever wins the nomination has a unusually high chance of becoming the MP in that seat. We have had to develop over the years, particularly in 2015, where all of our nominations were potentially open nominations. We had to develop very rigorous processes, and not uniquely or only or even specifically to counter foreign interference, but to make sure that that various outside groups or community organizations who would mobilize individuals were doing so in a way consistent with the rules of both Elections Canada around financing, because there are rules around nominations, around the money that goes into nominations, but also the rules of the Liberal Party around who can be a member, who can vote, and who's eligible to vote.
Well, then that actually leads to my next question, Prime Minister, which is in paragraph 70. If you look 6 lines down, NSICOP reports the following. It says, CSIS assesses that it is relatively easy to fraudulently add voters who live outside a riding to a nomination process's voter list with inaccurate addresses. It is also reportedly relatively easy to show an altered phone bill with the wrong address or a fraudulent letter from a school in order to vote in a nomination. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
That issue of accurate or inaccurate addresses is something that comes up not just in the context of foreign interference, but in the context of the push and pull of internal party processes where one candidate who is keen on winning the election may try and bring in people who live outside the riding, which means that we have developed, not infallible, but strong processes whereby we oversee, the party oversees the registration process and also has the possibility of legal counsel for the various candidates to oversee the nomination process and challenge the result if they feel that it was contested. So we have structures in place in the party to oversee that. Now, can those structures be strengthened? I have no doubt, and this is something that I'm entirely open for parties to be working with CSIS and the Commission on. What I will say is I'm speaking right now to the way the Liberal Party manages contested nominations. I have no idea how the NDP or the Conservatives manage their contested nominations, and perhaps having the Commission look into a certain amount of transparency on that by the parties might be a good idea.
Commissioner, I have many more questions, but I'm out of time. Prime Minister, thank you.